George Washington Connors was mainly known as Buck Connors. I just did this at the cemetery a couple of weeks ago, the whole thing, only I get in character.
Good afternoon. My name is Norm Simpson. I'm the Quartzsite Mayor, and I'm going to give you a short presentation of what we will be doing at the cemetery with the Walk in the Past with honoring our pioneers. I still had my Yuma County Deputy Sheriff's badge and identification, and still had my 6-shooter strapped to my belt. Till the time of my death, I remained loyal to Quartzsite, Yuma, now La Paz County, and my country. I was buried in the family plot next to my son George.
Our mayor of Quartzsite is Norm Simpson. He actually found out that he looks like Buck Connors in Buck Connors' last years of his life.
Well, that's because he looks like Buck Connors.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't really, but he looks, I mean, he does resemble him, but no.
In 2008, my remains and those of my son George were exhumed and reinterred in the Pioneer section of the High Jolly Cemetery.
The Buck Connor corpse, where was he originally buried?
He buried on the corner of inside my pen on the corner, you know what I mean?
Buck Connors was a guy that lived here, I don't know the exact day or years, but he was a silent movie star.
I own the property, you know that the Chinese restaurant now is closed, you know what I mean?
Oh, it's closed.
Yeah, behind it, yeah.
And he was buried here in Quartzsite along with his child, I think a son. And sadly, his old burial ground has turned into looks like a tweaker hangout. Look at this mess, but here it is. He was buried next to this giant saguaro. And yesterday I noticed local addicts were hanging around here scavenging for whatever. But if you want to see it, it's right next to that saguaro.
I'm not exactly sure how he found out or knew that Buck Connors was buried here.
How did you find out that he was actually buried there? Do you remember?
The grave is right there.
Oh, really?
What the property, the grave is right there.
Oh, okay.
But he actually owned property here and he was buried here.
So he was buried right here next to this saguaro. I don't know if the saguaro was here when he was born or buried, but this is where he was buried and exhumed and then put in over at the cemetery.
There were the grave sites on the property and he didn't want them there any longer. So he called into the town of Quartzsite and told them that they had like an hour to get out there and move these 2 grave sites, which ultimately they did. They moved them into the cemetery. But because of the amount of time that they had to try to get these grave sites moved, there's parts of Mr. Connor that are still on his property and parts of him that are in the cemetery. We are trying to work to get him all into the cemetery, but we haven't quite got there yet. But so he's like part of him is in his property and part of him is in his cemetery.
So he's all over Quartzsite.
He's all over Quartzsite, literally.